So welcome to Coming to the Center, a Cherry Hill Seminary public program held each semester. Cherry Hill Seminary is the leading provider of education and practical training in leadership, ministry, and personal growth in pagan and nature-based spiritualities. Thank you for joining us today. I now have the pleasure and privilege of introducing our distinguished guest. Katrina Messenger is a poet, priestess, warrior, and witch. She is a full-time Wiccan mystic and an ordained minister. In 1999, she inaugurated a magical working called Connect DC to reconnect and heal the city of Washington, D.C. In 2004, after retiring from her career as a researcher, internet architect, and technologist, she opened the Reflections Mystery School. And now, as the elder of her religious order, she offers classes, rituals, spiritual direction, and mentorship to her many students, clients, and colleagues. Katrina is also a Washington, D.C. native with over 50 years of experience as a grassroots activist and community leader. She has taken on leadership roles in almost every group she has joined, including her election to the state presidency of Maryland, now the National Organization of Women, and later when she served 18 months as the acting minister for the Sojourner Truth Congregation of Unitarian Universalists. Katrina has studied mythology, esoteric sciences, and human development for over 30 years. The author of Elemental Psychology, using Jungian psychology and the sacred elements for spiritual development, and Descent, A Journey for Women, and Dark Beauty. She has published articles in the Reclaiming Quarterly, contributed to the highly successful book 12 Wild Swans, and taught at Reclaiming Witch Camps from 1997 to 2003. Katrina is an elder in her community and a recognized leader and teacher worldwide. So today, Katrina will talk to us about a group of subjects which have always been acute for Americans and others, but which have only become more urgent in the recent past. After she spends a few minutes talking to us, I'll rejoin the screen so that we can have a conversation, because I know most of us will have questions we'd like to ask. Please be sure your microphones are muted, and if you have a question, please put it in the chat box. Again, welcome, Katrina.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Holly, for asking me to do this. And thank you to all my colleagues and friends and my cohort, and Maka is on here. I wanted to say a few things before I start. What I'm going to present in my lecture is information that I'm sure all of you already know. So it will definitely be my preaching to the choir, or as I usually say, preaching to the preachers. And so mostly I like to present it this way because to me it sets the background for what we talk about later. And that's very important to me. What's the other part? The other part, being of a certain age, and Maka will correct me to saying I'm just a youngster, I will forget words. So I want to warn you that I'll say, you know what I mean, and then explain everything around the word, but not the word. So that's part of my age, is also part of my illness. So I'll let you know that now, because when I was talking with Holly earlier this week, for the life of me, I couldn't remember the term cognitive dissonance. So somebody write that down for when I need it next, okay? And later I'll tell you the story if you ask me about the futon and how I forgot that word. So now we're going to begin with the presentation. So let me, let's see. And so everyone sees, hopefully, the presentation. Good. All right. And oops. I want to talk about what has been lost. We don't often talk of it this way, but we who are of European descent, and I include myself in that we've lost a lot. And understanding what we have lost and what its implications are will explain why we have been continually duped in supporting certain systems of oppression and certain types of false histories and false memories. And so I want to start there because I want to present it specifically from a spiritual standpoint first. And then later we can talk about the political, social, and economic impacts of patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy. So first, I want to discuss what's been lost. And then, and by first, oh, how does this work now? Okay. There it is. By first looking over, first the gods, the land, our ancestors, our language, and finally our bodies. And like I said, many of these things you already know or are really familiar with, because you guys are the type of people who would far more likely to be aware of these things than others. But I think it levels the playing field when we discuss it in this way. So let's proceed. In the beginning, all tribes of humans wandered. And wandering made us feel vulnerable, anxious, and uprooted. When we learned to cultivate the land, we stopped wandering and became attached to an environment. Our gods arise from the ancient landscapes of our ancestors, the sacred mountains, the overflowing river, the dark woods, the great beast, the mysterious moon, along with the brilliant sun, became our pantheon of divine beings. And whether the trees belong to the sun or the river or stand on their own comes directly from the landscape, directly from our environment. The attributes of the gods are derived from the specific natures of the natural environment. Whether the mountain is snow-capped or tree-topped denotes whether it's an old and wise god or a potent and young one. The rain, if it comes often, is a giving god, while if it is seldom, it is a stingy one. If the river dries up or overflows, depending on the season, then it is a moody god to be appeased. If the trees bear fruit, it is an abundant and bountiful God. If the water is fresh, the God is sweetness. If it is salty, then it is the tears of the weeping God. In animistic fashion, the divine essence of each God born from our lived experience exists beyond our comprehension, but the facet we call into our lives is known by what each has shown our ancestors. And just like the land itself, the gods do not belong to us. We, in fact, belong to them. We are far more their people than they are our gods. When the gods are unlinked from the land, they can become simplistic thought forms and lose their vibrant connection to the natural world. And it is these thought forms which can then be manipulated by those in power. Early gods were usually associated with motherhood, agriculture, and sometimes the celestial vault. Still, it is amazing how often it is a storm god or a lightning god that rules over patriarchal religions. As people of the land, our ancestors settled into a specific landscape. They bathed in and drank the waters. They bled, cried, sweated, gave birth, and made love on this land. Over time, the land and the waters came to know us by our taste, our rhythms, our dances, and songs. Living in the now, the expanded now, allowed us to not only learn the language of the land, it allowed the land to hear us, comfort us, and instruct us. The predators taught us how to hunt. The mountains and forests taught us about depth, height, and mystery. The birds of the land taught us language. The seasons, the stars, and the moon taught us time. We learned our place in nature, and what we knew what home truly meant. When we lose our connection to the land because of natural disaster or war or being pushed off the land, we become unanchored. The connection between the land and the waters that own you is critical to a sense of place in the larger world. Without it, we always feel homeless. And whether our ancestors were buried, burned, lifted into the trees, or left in underground caves, tradition guided us as we cared for their bodies, sang the songs, recited the prayers, and remembered them. The ancestors were our roots, our anchor to the past. They and their connection to the land not only afforded us a place to call home, it also anchored us in time because we were connected to a family line, a family that shared stories, tall tales, and anecdotes. The community witnessed and acknowledged each passing into the beyond. Deaths and births marked time and generations. When we could no longer tend to the burial sites and the old cemeteries, our world became less and less contained, and we became less held in the arms of those who came before us. At first, it may have seemed like an exhilarated sense of newfound freedom, but as each generation approached its own march toward mortality, that freedom became a hollow welcoming as each generation drifted further and further away from their ancestors' homes, our ancestors' bones. Over time, our hunger for home, a spiritual connection, and a sense of belonging became an unconscious obsession. A promise of a new home is all that is needed to set us off to become colonizing shock troops for the powers that rule. In mythical terms, humans learned the sacred art of language from the birds. Why birds? Because birds have a wide range of calls that occur within the range of human voice. In Norse, Greek, Hindu, and Sufi traditions, the language of the birds represented a divine or perfect language. In Welsh, Russian, German, Estonian, Greek, and Romani folklore, learning the language of birds afforded one a boon. Moreover, the languages of our ancestors resembled the sounds of the birds, insects, and other animals from their environment. Until the Latinization of the European languages, language like gestures and images evolved along lines of influence and interaction. Language also shapes the development of our psyches. Each individual within a community shares their experience through the lens of a shared language. We joke about the strictness of Germans, the timeliness of the Swiss, and the laid-back manner of the Italians, but how much of these national identities are shaped by the flow of their respective language and vice versa? With the migration of Europeans into the New World, the imperative to assimilate in order to obtain the American dream, the ancestral language was often the first casualty. A shared language with the ancestors give our stories a rootedness. When we no longer comprehend the language of our ancestors, we lose more than just the meaning of the words. We lose connection to their hopes, dreams, and inner symbols. It is as if our bodies, our dreams, our minds, and our hearts speak different languages. We become at odds with ourselves. We are driven by unseen and unknown drives and obsessions. It becomes difficult to comprehend what is and what is not in our own best interests. Harlan Ellison, in his short story, Repent, Harlequin, said the TikTok man, provides us a ready symbol of time as the cruel dictator of our modern life. In a world where everyone and everything must sublimate themselves to the rule of the mechanical clock, we are all forced to bend our will toward the rules of the TikTok man. And the quote on the screen is from that story, that book, one of my favorite. And so it goes, and so it goes, and so it goes, and so it goes, goes, tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. And one day we no longer let time serve us. We serve time. And we are slaves of the schedule. Time is money. No time to waste. Be on time. I'm late, I'm late, I'm late for an important date. The mechanical clock to which we have enslaved ourselves collectively is not a reflection of the natural world. What nature reveals about a day is dawn, midday, dusk, and night, which aligns with what is often called indigenous time. It is also what the hours of the ancient cultures relied on to divide the day for their prayers, rites, and other observances. Then we can consider that time in nature is expansive and open, that it can expand and contract as needed. We can extrapolate what it takes to move humanity from such a living and breathing time to the cold, hard time of the tick-tock man. Further, we can deduce that it must have been by force. No one would choose to give up such a time, at least not willingly. The earliest known division of time into mechanical hours came from Egypt and its need to regulate its slaves. The association of clocks with forced labor is not a coincidence. But if time exists in nature in a far different form, then it must serve some purpose. We could say that time in nature is a consequence of the turning world. Because it is the turning of the world that gives us days, the spinning of the moon around the earth that gives us months, and the moving of the earth around the sun that gives us years. Moreover, all of the living world, all of nature exists within what is called the endless now. The animals, plants, rocks, land, sea, etc., all continually exist in the present moment. We humans live in either our memories or in our visions, past or future, but not within the endless now. This has far-reaching implications and brings into focus the mind-body split. Our bodies are still tied to our animal selves, and thus the body remains in the now. In the matrix, humans are held within pools of liquid connected to a vast system that harvests the electrical output of our bodies. To keep the bodies from escaping, the minds are linked into a simulated universe called the Matrix. The Wachowskis created a cultural masterpiece that exposed a key aspect of the reality and implications of the mind-body split. That our minds are held captive to stop us from waking up to the reality of our bodily enslavement. This is the purpose of the mechanical clock: to erase our connection to the turning world and sever our mind-body integration, to stop us from facing the reality that we are all slaves. We may be wage slaves identified by Marx, but we are slaves nonetheless. We have turned into the very robots we have feared, slaves now to the digital clock, minds without bodies. What has been lost? Well, the number one thing is our shared humanity and our deep, deep connections to the natural world. And this is important to recognize. It's important to see that it wasn't just the stealing of the commons in Europe. It was also the stealing of the natural world, the stealing of the lands, the language, the gods. It may have been like the Romans, where they let you keep your god, they just called it by Roman names. But the Inquisition even ended that. We lost a great deal. And what it did was leave us hungry and homeless, hungry for things we could not name, and homeless in ways we could not fathom. And so it became easy to use people who were hungry and homeless, who were missing their spiritual connections, who were missing sleeping in the hands of their gods. It was very easy to then use those people to cause unmitigated harm. And those are the reasons why we as a country have continually supported the patriarchy, continually supported capitalism, continually supported white supremacy, even when it is not even in our own best interests as individuals nor as communities. It is because we are hungry for a spiritual home, a spiritual connection. And that hunger means we will do anything in order to keep it, acquire it, and to basically stay in a position where it is still possible. Some of you may agree with me on the patriarchy and the white supremacy. Some of you may not agree with me on the capitalism. But yeah, capitalism is, if you think about why the Luddites, those poor, abused Luddites, drew their clogs into the knitting machines, into the mills working wares, because they were being told they had to act like machines, and they did not want to be a machine. They wanted to stay human. They wanted to stay in their animal nature. And now when we look back, we can understand what they were complaining about as we check our watches and we move according to the clock, as we rush only in the hours that's set aside for it. Right? We got a break during the COVID, and now the streets are clogged at rush hour again. Why would we ever go back? It's just mind-boggling. So let's talk about patriarchy and capitalism and white supremacy. Now, Holly had said to me that you guys might be a little slow to start, so I suggested Holly have questions ready to start me off.
I have some questions. I've shared with you the story of the 12 Wild Swans, the European fairy tale, and its lesson, or what I got from it, the punchline was, you should not have made that wicked vow. Just because you made a vow doesn't mean it was right. That's profoundly influenced my own life. So can you talk to us about how we can change the myth and the wicked vow of our own lives in the communities we live in?
Well, we have to talk about what that vow is, what that promise is.
Yeah.
And the thing is that people will say, well, my hands are clean. I didn't make that vow. Yeah, she did. It's an unconscious vow. It's an unconscious promise. I've been writing about some of this for a while, and I wrote this. I did this presentation, this talk about the spiritual hungers. I wrote another one about the archetype of patriarchal oppression, and I'm working on one now talking about the psychopathology of American society. And one of the things that is really interesting is our obsession with, and I'm gonna get to it, our obsession with stories about serial killers. That we're all interested in reading about, movies about, television series about, books about psychopaths and sociopaths. And we all want to read about them. And I'm a certified archetypal pattern analyst, and so I kept saying, why are we so interested in these people, right? Because they don't actually occur that often in the population, according to the studies, but a lot of literature is focused on them, a lot of film and video. And what I realized is that they serve a purpose of making sure that we know that we're not like them. We constantly have to be shown these people who are just outrageously evil, you know, especially psychopaths, because sociopath is actually a mental disorder. Psychopath, not so much. Well, we just need to be reassured that we're not like them. We're not psychopaths. I can tell you, because you see that guy who eats people, that's the psychopath. That's the crazy one, not me, because see, we're so different. Or that one over there that buries people in the front yard, that's not me. I'm not like that. And yet, we live at a time where we have seen everyday people laughing at children crying because they have been pulled away from their parents. We have seen people being callous in the face of hundreds of thousands of people dying. We have seen people get in an uproar about learning the facts of the American history because they don't want to hear about how many Black people or First Nation people or people who were in the country before it was a country and got pushed out. We don't want to hear about them because that's just bad history, and that's not my country, because my country is the best on earth. What the? In history, you can go back, and of course you can see the Tulsa massacre that we now all know about. I got news for you. A lot of us already knew about it. So it's, as we say where I'm from, it's the rest of y'all that's learning about it, right? Or you can hear about all the Mexicans who were Mexicans and Mexican Americans because they happened to live where they was living before the line got moved. And they were all kicked out because the people in the southern states felt that they were stealing their jobs. And then just after they kicked them all out, which was the start of the Great Depression, it was like less than 6 years later, there was a governmental program to bring in Mexicans because we need people to work because, oh my God, we are having a hell of a time getting prepared for the war. Right? So we had this whole campaign where all the southern states to push these same people out. And then we had the federal government going down into Mexico and saying, please bring them back. And then the people in LA, the authorities in LA let the soldiers who were in dock out for a rampage just so they can beat, maim, and kill Mexicans because folks were angry at them because of their style of their clothing, is what they said. I'm not even going to talk about the police killings or the First Nation, the resources being absent or stolen. And let's talk about all the folks who said that it is because of freedom that they need high capacity ammo while we have people being massacred all over the country. I'm sorry, who are the psychopaths?
Katrina.
And so the unholy vow is that we accept just those terms. That's the unholy vow. That as long as I have what I think is due to me as a white person, as a man, as an educated person, as long as I'm getting those things, what you do over there has nothing to do with me. That's the beginning of the unholy vow, right there.
You said something to me one day recently that really hit me hard. You said when they chanted, "You will not replace us" in Charlottesville, that was irrelevant because every person who thinks they're privileged is never going to be able to access a position of power.
Right. That's the other part.
Even in an all-white society.
Right. So we have this lie that says if you stick with white, you're going to get ahead. So if you don't get ahead, it must be somebody else's fault. Well, the reality is there ain't so many places up there to get to. So most people are never going to make it. But they have built in the blame mechanism, right? I worked in a telephone company, and all those white men believed it was their turn to get promoted. But they were only, it's a damn pyramid. There's not so many places up there. But they were willing to do anything for the belief that it would be their turn at some point, right? And these are the kind of people, this is the kind of place where the people that, above you are the same age as you. They're not going to retire or get old or leave or whatever. They're going to be there for the same time you're there. And so this belief that I may be the one that makes it means that I could then band together with those in power against those who are being marginalized.
So the American dream was just a dream.
It's just a dream.
But
it was invented after you have to know when the American dream became a dream. It wasn't a dream for all of our history. It became a dream after the war, because we had all this excess capacity. We had all these men coming back, and we didn't have any jobs for them because the women were doing the job. So first, they had to find a way to make women lesser again, right? Because women were out there building airplanes and tanks and everything else. So we had to make all the women go back home, right? But at the same time, they had to get all these men. It was a dream, but it still wasn't unifying. Country. But only those of a certain class could afford the dream of their home, right? The dream of a better place. Oh, it was you, Holly, said something about I'm now a full suburbanite. I mean, they had to invent a whole new section of housing between the rural areas and the cities to invent a place for these white people to go so they could go someplace where they weren't, around those lessers. But they invented the whole concept of the American dream being something was possible for every working man. And by man, let's be real clear, a lot of those housing programs and things, were working white men. And so the concept that I will get this, whether you get it or not, is not the point. The point is that you suddenly feel is that it is something due to you. And therefore you're willing to. And when those get it, they had to find someone to blame. And yeah, that's part of the unholy vow. I was watching there's a group I work with called White Awake. Some of you may have heard of them. They put on some incredible programs. And in one of them, they showed the film of these men dressed in ethnic attire going into this, this little stoned thing and changing into business suits and coming out real Americans. It was supposed to show this is a transformation. Is that you may have been some ethnic whatever, but now you're a real American, And it became a huge push to get, all the European descendants to become together and to see that they were on the same side. Because that was not clear at all prior to that. I mean, even the invention of the term white. When my studies, when I was at Howard University, they were talking about how white became a term of solidarity for those of Northern European descent. And then suddenly they started recouping as many people as they could. Because you see, what would happen is every group they didn't allow in, right, suddenly was linking arms with African Americans, and other people of color. And so they had to keep breaking up those populist movements. And so they just kept recruiting more and more Europeans till even Italians were considered white, which was very funny, right? Because I know a lot of Italians and a lot of them are darker than me, but that's not the point. The whole idea that this vow that you've taken that you didn't know you've taken, right, is there for every generation. Every generation re-ups the promise, re-ups the vow. And so the question is, how do you get out of the vow, right? How do you break it? Well, you got to break it by making it conscious, right? The reason that it's still there is because it hasn't been conscious, right? When it becomes conscious, then you have to do something about it. And that's what makes it irritating. You just assume leave it in the dark if you're like anybody else. And that's what makes it difficult. It's like, how do I do this? Well, you get busy, learn how to do it, find out. But it's an unholy vow. And every time that you take advantage of that privilege unconsciously, right? Because half of you don't even know you're using it, right? That's the other part of it, is to make it invisible so that your compliance comes so easy, right? If you had to wear a sign saying, I'm do this because I'm white everywhere you went, and they checked your badge, then you would be aware, and it would be distinctly uncomfortable. So they did it the other way. Everywhere I go, I'm just told I'm just not allowed in one way or another. And they can't just tell me once, because I'm apparently African Americans, we may forget from this block to the next. So it's like our African American men will then be stopped on every block by the police. I'll be told at every door of the employees to the rear. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a hotel or a restaurant and been told, well, you're supposed to report back in the back. What made you think, just looking at me, that I couldn't come in the front? And people say, oh, it's better now. Yeah. Some places I can go in the front, but all my folks who are working in the kitchen are not being paid properly. It's not just about me. And that's the other part of American culture. It's not just about what happens to you. And so it's really important here to be able to bring to consciousness your privilege, be aware of your privileges, and so you can subvert it, so you can consciously extend it to cover other people. Well, yes, I'm here and I'm bringing all them with me. How's about that? But yeah, there's lots of ways to find out just what privilege you have access to, what it looks like, and how it is actually there in your life without you even participating in it consciously. It just is.
So what about our families and their origin stories? How do we reclaim ethnicity? You were talking to me about that again the other day. And honor our ancestors without appropriating culture and without creating exclusionary boundaries.
Well, it's a thing. I mean, I mentioned the reason why they
we seem to have lost Katrina momentarily. Whoops, here she comes.
Sorry about that.
Okay, you're back.
I'm back. Zoom. Gosh, Zoom, I love you. No, I don't. So please repeat your question again so I can remember.
Yeah. Well, Cherry Hill's been, and I'll combine it with another question I have. Cherry Hill's been concerned
about the families and ancestry.
Ethnicity, yeah.
Yeah, okay, I remember.
Without that going into a racialized religious.
Well, one of the things I mentioned. Yeah, the thing that I mentioned, the whole thing of why it is that those of us of European descent are already hungry for culture, hungry for ancestors, hungry for a spiritual connection, is because so much of that has been broken. Some of it was economic causes, right? I mean, the stealing of the commons in Europe, where people went from being able to be on the land and connected to the land, and suddenly the land was somehow owned by someone else and the commons became privatized, meant people were ripped from lands that were their own, or they were forced to work on their ancestral lands, but for someone else. And so there was a lot of loss that occurred while they were still in Europe. There's also the issue of the culture wars, and you can call it by many names, from the Romans and them coming in and imposing their standards, and as well as when the church became, we call the Holy Roman Empire, where they actually brought in their own religion and start tearing down the pagan sites. So in many ways, there was already a spiritual hunger. There was already a spiritual loss. But coming to the US, initially, folks kept to their cultural traditions, very much so. But with the advent of the need to create a barrier so that it'd be easily to bring the people, the colonizers, together to help in stealing land, killing the indigenous population, and then later being able to determine who was a slave and who was not. The issue of that solidarity needed to be knitted together. And so people begin to lose all their touch with, except in certain circumstances, their ethnic backgrounds. And why is it so important to be connected? Well, for one, I mean, you need to have a feeling that you are still held in the arms of your ancestor. You still need to know that you are a part of a long lineage, right? You don't cure a spiritual hunger like that by just saying, don't do bad things, right? If it was that easy, some folks have been saying, don't do bad things for a long while, and folks are still doing it. That hunger remains. And so one of the things that we have said, in many years of dealing with cultural appropriation is, you wouldn't be so hungry for my culture if you had reached out for your own. And that getting back in touch with those cultural and ethnic lineage is very important to helping to heal that wound. Now, it's not going to be like it's going to be simple, because most of us are mutts, right? We don't have just one cultural background, but it's basically just making a connection. Wide Awake does an incredible thing where they have you set up an altar as part of your, their Before You Were White and their solidarity courses, so that you can actually use your work to learning about how this country was actually built. Use that work as part of your overall work to spiritually reconnect with your ancestry, because it has to happen. It's not like you do one then the other. It has to happen along the same line. And it also means that you're going to have to piece it together at some point, right? But here's the thing I've told everyone, because I've done appropriation workshops. I don't know if you've been to the one, Holly, that I usually give. I gave in at Sacred Space over the years. And last time I was at Temple Fest, I gave it. The thing is that you may not know who all these ancestors are, and some of you do, but they know who you are. And so you can rely on those pieces of yourself that come from that era. And then you can just do your homework. That if you can't get names, do your homework about the culture of those time periods and learn about what was there, get the history of those countries. And yeah, it may be several countries or several lineages. That's okay. Learn what you can about each and use that, because your ancestors know who you are. And so all you have to do is reach out, and they'll reach out to you. It is really a very welcoming practice to do that. The other part of it is that just like I said, the gods don't belong to us, right? This is something I'm constantly ragging on, is that we belong to them. And the gods you belong to and the gods that call you are not your choice, right? You need to listen. And I always joke, that's one of the differences between us and so many of the fundamentalist religions, is that our gods are still talking. And so you can listen and find out what is appropriate for you and use discernment. I mean, what's wrong with a little discernment once in a while? And, you know, because if you feel like the only one's calling to you is somebody else's guys, it's like, then do a little bit more digging. Do a little bit more digging. Do your due diligence. And if you're being called by the Orishas, then go take training. Don't do it on your own. If you're being called by the Great Spirit, go get training. If you're being called by the Mayans, there are Mayan practitioners around. Go get training. Do your due diligence. Take your time and get appropriate training and confirmation that it works, that it's okay for you to do this. I don't see how that's such a hard path to walk if you're trying to be ethical and abide by some values that we all hold very dear. But yeah, the gods don't belong to us. We belong to them, and they will call to us, and if we do our work, we'll be right by them.
Diane has a question along those lines. She says, how would you suggest we reconnect our animal selves and our spiritual selves in our TikTok world?
Well, one of the things that I'm working on is I'm finishing up a manuscript on time. I think it has to do with how we work with time. That has come out really crystal clear to me, that we have to learn how to be in the now. And it sounds very simple, right? And it calls to mind things like mindfulness, which are very good tools. The mindfulness tools are very good, but I don't think that's enough. I think there needs to be more, what do I call it? More motivation to understand it and to appreciate why it's so necessary. We have a very warped view of what now means. We think now is like now. No. Now. There's a joke in my school when I say, well, let's get together now. And the students will say, you mean now? Oh, no, she means now. Oh, no, she meant now, but that has passed. So it's the new now, right? And we joke about it endlessly because they actually know that what I'm talking about is called the endless now. This is what the rest of the world exists within, the endless now. It's much larger than our concepts of now. So every other animal on this planet, every tree, every shrub, every rock, every mountain, every river exists in endless now. We're the only ones who speed past it on our way to the future, or lay back from it into the past, or for our endless nostalgia. But the endless now, to get there, it takes a regular spiritual practice. And maybe before this ends, I'll do a exercise about the endless now. So you remind me before we get to the end, Holly, and I'll do one of the exercises I use to teach the endless now. But getting into the endless now means that we are finally allowing our minds to be in sync with our bodies. And allowing our minds to be in sync with our bodies, that automatically helps bring spiritual, because if you're into, like I am, the triple soul, then you understand that the doorway to the spiritual realm is through our bodies. And so that if we can come into that place of unity between mind and body, we're all in the endless now, you have a direct connection to your God self. You're spiritually aligned. And the world operates differently. I can tell you, when we've done our sequestered intensives, that we will start a meal just at regular, time, and then we'll stop and do this exercise and go into endless now, and the food changes. It tastes different. The water is different. The temperature of the air is different. People even look slightly different. It is an incredible practice. And what it teaches you is how much we miss from flitting about, without regards to the realm of the true realm of earth. It's because we're not willing to just be. And that's a consequence of the culture, right? The culture We have a culture that doesn't support our bodies. We have a culture that doesn't support our communities and our literally the land we live on. We have cultures that take us out of the real day-to-day reality. And how can we heal the mind-body split if we can't come join our bodies in the world in which we live to really appreciate the earth realm? You know, we talk about that, you know, many of us in the neo-pagan movement, we are the ones who believe the earth is sacred. Yet so many of us don't actually stay around to actually be in the earth realm. And so it is very important that we really give it some space and time in our lives. And not just, you know, when you're sitting down and meditating, which is wonderful. Please continue that if you're doing it. But also when you're having conversations, when you're with your loved ones, be in the now. Be fully present. And that practice, oh my goodness, it helps bring us all closer together. It does wonders for our ability to make smarter or more what I call generative decisions. And by generative, I mean in alignment with nature. If we can be in alignment with nature, then we are halfway there. And so many of you I know are already doing great things in the world. And this is just another way to bring that up a notch, to take the work that you're doing already to another level, is to do it while you're in the earth realm, right? Yeah, I love going to the realm of the mind. Yeah, I'm a what do you call it? I'm a mystic. I'm a space cadet. I love going up into the ethereal realm and then going into hide and building things. That's the kind of person I am. My job was as a researcher and a technologist. So I love that kind of stuff. But what I have found is the world is a wonderful place to be in. And this is the opportunity that life gives me, to be in this world. And I'm going to take advantage of it. I don't have to stay here. It's not a prison. But by goodness, we can be more unified. I hope that helps. And remind me before we get to the end.
I've written that down. We have a question from Valerie. Let's see, if we as neo-pagans are attempting to reconnect with our traditional lands and ancestral practices, how do we do this as settler colonists on Turtle Island without, on the one hand, appropriating, even accidentally or by default, indigenous spirituality, or on the other, imposing our European forms of spirituality, land-based practices here on the lands and ancestral spirits of Turtle Island?
You know, that's a really good question. And it's going to take a lot of us walking and talking and working together to figure it out. I know one of the things that that I have said is that blood is what do you call it? Blood is a blessing. Blood blesses things. So that when blood is spilled, it blesses the land. It blesses where you stand. And I have known places where I have stood and says, you know, this land belongs to the First Nations, but my people bled on this land. And so therefore I can call it sacred. And because of that, I do believe that that is possible. How do we work together is more of the question to me. How do we work our way through this madness we call this culture, this society, this place now, right? There are a couple of ways. I mean, African Americans have been talking about where are our reparations, right? And it's such a sin to bring it up. It was like, why? Reparations is a way to make right. And reparations for First Nation people is also a way. And if you're in a position like some farmers have done out west, by all means, you can give back land, you can pay rent, you can do all kinds of things. But the thing is, there's not going to be one answer that fits all. And it's going to have to be peculiar specific and particular to a specific place and time. And I think that it calls for deep conversations, uncomfortable conversations. Here in Washington, D.C., we're very aware of many of the First Nations. Many of them are still here. I mean, that's the other part. And this whole thing about ancient history, they're still here. So we try when we can have conversations with them. I had one of the Seneca come down and help me start Connect DC with his blessing. We run into the Tyaks and the other folks around here all the time. So the thing is that there are ways of creating community and asking what would be the most helpful now, given what we have here together.
Will you tell the group about Connect DC for those who aren't aware of that project?
Connect DC, I was hungry for public pagan ritual, and I didn't know how hungry I was for it till I went to visit my friends in San Francisco. And I happened to be there on spring equinox in '98, and I saw them doing a spring equinox ritual in the public, right in the middle of a park, and people were still coming, and we were leaving. They were like, "Where's the ritual?" And it was hundreds of people, and my mind was blown. Because in DC at the time, if you had a ritual anywhere, you had to know somebody that knew somebody that knew somebody, and then still you might not get the right address. And the closest we had ever come to a public ritual, we held, at a place that was off the beaten path, and only certain people knew we were there. And we had like over 100 people, but it was, it still wasn't quite in the city. It was right outside the city, in Alexandria. So it was a big deal, me seeing that it was possible to do that in San Francisco. So, all hail to reclaiming. But when I came home, I started talking to people about it and how I wanted to have the expectation of public pagan ritual available to folks in this area. And it was incredibly hard. There were so many people who were afraid. And I've always been an out person. I was an out member of my communist group. I've been out as a witch ever since I was one. I don't stay closeted for anything. So I was like, you know what? If you don't want to put your name on it, don't. I'm going to do it. And if you want to show up, you're welcome. And so I came up with an idea of doing ritual in a public place. And a dear friend told me about the standing stones around Washington. As many folks know, their American history, the city of Washington was created by taking land from Maryland and Virginia. What you don't know is the land they took from Maryland and Virginia, there was a specific reason why that piece of land was wanted. And that's because it was a great crossroads for many of the First Nation tribes. And so that this area was already looked upon very highly for its position in the energy lines of this area. And so they started out with Benjamin Banneker and L'Enfant. They set out a survey group to go around and to lay out basically a compass rose. So they lay out a diamond for the shape of the city. And then inside the city, they were supposed to put circles and all kinds of symbols, and a bunch of Masons designed it. And so they set up stones in the 1790s all around the 10 by 10 mile diamond. And the Capitol was supposed to be in the center. It's not. The White House is. Think about that. And there was a bunch of other things that they did. And those stones, the ones at the cardinal points, the fixed points, right, were made larger than the other stones. And those stones are still there. And when Virginia took the land back because they were worried about, who gets to own slaves and what might happen if they're associated with the capital city, it was like they broke a diamond. And the energy that it takes to heal a diamond has to be much, much greater. And so I got the idea, let's heal that diamond. Let's reinforce the original boundaries of the city and reconnect it. The funny thing, every major boundary stone we went to, all the major ones still had magic from the Masons in it. And it had been contained by the daughters of the American Revolution with little circles of iron to protect them. But what they had protected was the original magic. Every time we stuck our hand in, we could feel it. It was like, holy shit, this shit's still humming. So basically, it's like we turned on the torches. We went around the points around the city according with the holidays, starting at spring equinox of '99 and in the eastern marker. They went to the southern marker for summer solstice. They went to the western marker for fall equinox, the northern marker for winter solstice, and in year 2000 back to the eastern marker, and then we declared the entire city sacred space. And we used halfway around, we found that some wisdom keepers from the First Nations were meeting right in the center of the city with sacred fires for 7 years before we started. And they kept saying, you know what we need? We need to have one of them goddess people go around the city. And they never actually spoke to us. We found each other at the western marker, and they sent us the ashes from 7 years of fire, and we sent them the water from our western ritual, and we joined the two things. So it was beautiful. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that.
So now we did for a while that we just celebrated our 20th anniversary. And we are now, we used to still do ritual all over the city, and now we're back at Two River Sanctuary, my land here in the city. And we do ritual here. And because of COVID, we had to go online. So now you can find all our rituals at Connect DC's page on YouTube.
Okay, so another resource for us. By the way, I did put the Wide Awake link in the chat box for those who might want it. Valerie also asks about ways for neo-pagans to work to, she says, end capitalism. I might say to transform whatever it is that the system we live in, so that we're not slaves to capitalism anymore. You have any thoughts there?
First off, thank you, Comrade Valerie. Hey, one of the things we got to understand, we need to learn more. There is a dearth of understanding of economics within most communities, and that's on purpose. The market existed before capitalism. The market, as a function of selling what you have in excess and getting what you don't have, has existed for a very long time, for over millenniums of years. And so the idea that somehow the market is that thing that they gamble on, that big gambling situation they have for stocks, is a misapplication of the terminology. And so we need to understand that we as citizens of the earth, we have certain amount of resources, life force and resources that we transform into something that actually has exchange value. And so they represent our life force. What we spend our life force on matters. A way to support the people who are producing, the people who are bringing things to market, and to support them and locally support them. We can do more to handle capitalism than anything else, right? We don't have to, beat the presses or break down the big yarn machines that are knock down capitalism. All we have to do is start making it local. The more local it becomes, the more it becomes part of our community. The next thing we do is to understand our relationship with the international markets and make a value shift to ensure that those things you buy from the international market are actually the money is going to the people who produce it. So it's about fair. You can do decisions that way. And then the last part is, don't believe that a cheap price means it is better for you. There's a high cost for the cheap prices. Anytime that you go to get a job somewhere and they hand you your employee manual and your application for food stamps at the same meeting, says there's something is wrong. And we should support those businesses that are willing to pay a livable wage, a wage that in fact is thrivable, that not just livable, but thrivable, that people can earn that money and actually have a good life. But we should not just be anti-money. That's immature. We need to understand what economics is and make sure that the money we have goes towards supporting the values we hold. And if you don't want a revolution, what is it? If you don't want a revolution, then work for change. Because if we don't have change, that's what it's going to be.
Katrina, it's almost 4:15, and Mara says, and stop confusing capital with virtue.
Yeah.
I'll say amen to that. Is there a closing thought you'd like to leave us with?
Well, I want to encourage you to learn more about what's really happening in the world and learn your history. As much as I say be in the endless now, you really got to learn your history. There's so much misinformation. There's so much outright lies and propaganda that is what we thought was the truth. And I say all of us. I was lucky to have a parent who was a researcher and historian at the Smithsonian Institute who could bring Black history into the classroom when I was a child. But there's no excuse now. There's so many curriculum, books, and places like Wide Awake that are willing to give you information so that if you learn better by hearing and participating in a classroom with other people, well, a virtual classroom, then there's that. If you're better at reading, there's that. If you're better at going out and going to the library and talking to people in real time, you can do that. But yeah, there's no excuse for accepting this. It's not even benign ignorance at this point. It is an ignorance that is basically is being used to, I don't know, to excuse yourself from being held accountable. And that's not the way I would choose to live. And I doubt many of you would want that to be the thing you would choose consciously.
Katrina, you said you'd like to do that endless now exercise.
Sure.
Would you like to?
Yeah, I like to give credit to David Abram. I've never met him, but I love his books. He's such a great writer. And this exercise comes from his I believe it's his first book, Spell of the Sensuous. And when I first read it, it blew me away, and I had to read it again. And the exercise is in there, and it is so simple. Let me tell you this: if you think it is hard, then you're working too hard. It is very simple. I want you to imagine that you have in your hand, I don't care which hand, you have in your hand an hourglass, which is the better symbol for time than a clock. Trust me, the hourglass. I actually have one. I should have brought it down. So you have an hourglass in your hand, right? And the hourglass, it has that lovely shape where it has one, portion of the vessel is shaped, and then it has a pinched part, and then the rest of it comes down. And the sand then flows through that little pinched place, right? And you turn it over, and then it flows the other direction, right? So let's take that hourglass and turn it on its side. So one side is in one hand, and the other side is in the other hand. And you let it sort of like hang in the air, because we're all magic folks here, right? Yeah, okay. So we have this hourglass here in front of us. And I want you to see that that vessel to the left is the past, and that vessel to the right is the future, okay? And then I want you to take your hands on each side of that vessel, because that pinch space in the middle is the current now. It is the now, the present, right? And I want you to squeeze either side. Keep squeezing the sides of the hourglass. Keep squeezing those vessels until you can expand that middle portion. Make that pinch portion as wide as you possibly can. Now open your eyes, because it's not a trance. And just sit for a second. Do you feel that? Just nod. You feel the difference? That's the endless now. Just breathe in it. Look around the room. I normally have people get up and walk around, go outside and everything. And when you feel it starting to slip, because it will slip, right? At some point it'll start to slip. Just take the hourglass again, turn it over its side, and squeeze until the middle gets bigger. And you come right back.
Thank you. Katrina, I'm sure that we could sit here and do this all day long. I know I would like to.
Oh, you know I would love it. I would love to sit around and have a couple of drinks and we just go at it, you know?
Yes.
I tell folks when I start drinking hard liquor, I turn into V.I. Lenin.
Well, we just want to thank you again so much for this gift of your wisdom. And thank you to all of you who came today. We are going to put a recording of this on our YouTube channel for those who might have missed it or want to go back and reflect some more. And if you did register for this, I will tell you now, we will put you on our Cherry Hill Seminary email list. But all you have to do if you really hate getting anything, and we don't send that much out, is just unsub at the bottom of any mailing we send. So with no further ado, we'll say goodbye for now and hope to see you very soon in the endless now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.